When heiress Charlotte Ashford risks her legacy and heart for a horse trainer with a past, the battle between love and legacy begins. But can she protect her future without repeating her mother's greatest regret? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun cast a golden glow over Ashford Meadows as Charlotte "Charlie" Ashford stood on the balcony of her family mansion, watching the stable hands begin their day. At 36, Charlie was the picture of sophistication in her tailored navy suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. She was the heiress to the most prestigious equestrian estate outside Austin, a business worth millions, and yet the view of the stables in the distance was the only thing that brought her peace. "Ms. Ashford, your 9 o'clock conference call is in 10 minutes, said Marissa, her assistant, appearing at the door with a tablet. Charlie sighed, turning away from the view. "Thank you, Marissa. I'll be right there." This was her life now, meetings, calls, contracts, and appearances. Since her father's stroke last year, the burden of running Ashford Meadows had fallen entirely on her shoulders. The board of directors watched her every move, waiting for her to fail. "Also, your father is asking to see you this evening. He mentioned something about the Henderson merger," Marissa added. Charlie nodded, feeling the familiar tightness in her chest. Her father, even from his sickbed, still tried to control every aspect of the business and her life. As she walked through the grand hallway of the mansion, photos of Ashford champions lined the walls. Horses that had won national competitions, horses that had made the Ashford name synonymous with excellence. It was a legacy she was expected to preserve at all costs. Later that afternoon, Charlie escaped to the stables. She changed from her business attire into jeans and boots, letting her hair fall loose around her shoulders. Here, among the horses, she could breathe. No one was watching, judging, waiting for her to make a mistake. She approached Storm, her favorite mare, and began brushing her coat with slow, even strokes. "How, you don't care about profit margins or board meetings, do you, girl?" she whispered, pressing her forehead against the horse's neck. "She's looking good, ma'am." The deep voice startled her. Charlie turned to find Sawyer Beck standing at the stall entrance, his tall frame filling the doorway. With his worn jeans, plaid shirt, and the cowboy hat he removed at the sight of her, he was the epitome of a Texas horseman. "Mr. Beck, I didn't hear you approach," she said, straightening her posture. "Sorry to startle you, just checking on the new foal. He's taking to the training well." Sawyer Beck had been hired 8 months ago to oversee the care of the horses and train the foals. At 40, he had the weathered look of a man who'd spent his life outdoors. His limp, the result of a rodeo accident years ago, did nothing to diminish his commanding presence. The staff spoke highly of his skill with the horses, especially the difficult ones. "I'm glad to hear it," Charlie replied, trying to maintain a professional tone despite feeling oddly self-conscious about her casual appearance. "The Richardson family is paying a premium for that one," Sawyer nodded, his eyes never quite meeting hers. "He'll be ready. Just needs time to build trust." Something about the way he said it made Charlie pause. There was a gentleness in his voice. That contrasted with his rough exterior. "I was hoping to see the training tomorrow," she found herself saying. Now he did look at her, his blue eyes momentarily connecting with hers before looking away. "Yes, ma'am, whenever suits you." With the tip of his hat, he turned to leave, his limp more pronounced as he walked away. Charlie watched him go, wondering why she felt so tongue-tied around a man who worked for her. Perhaps it was because he was one of the few people on the estate who didn't treat her like Ms. Ashford the boss or Charlie Henry Ashford's daughter. He simply treated her with quiet respect and kept his distance. That evening, Charlie visited her father in the east wing of the mansion. Henry Ashford sat in his wheelchair by the window, his once powerful frame now diminished, but his eyes as sharp and calculating as ever. "You're late," he said by way of greeting. "I was reviewing the Richardson contract," she lied, not wanting to tell him she'd spent an extra hour at the stables. "The Henderson family called today. Their son Bradford is back from Europe. They want to discuss merging their property with ours." Henry's voice was slurred from the stroke, but his meaning was clear. Charlie felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The Hendersons had been trying to join their estate with Ashford Meadows for years. The merger inevitably included the suggestion that Charlie and Bradford Henderson would make a suitable match. "Dad, we've discussed this. The Hendersons want our bloodlines and our clients. Once they have those, they'll push us out entirely. Don't be dramatic. Bradford is a good match for you. 38, Harvard Business School, knows the industry. And after that embarrassment with James last year, you need to rebuild your reputation. The mention of her broken engagement made Charlie's cheeks burn. She had ended things with James Whitmore 3 weeks before the wedding when she discovered he was more interested in the Ashford name than in her. The society pages had been merciless, painting her as the cold Ashford girl who doesn't know what she wants. My reputation is fine, she said, keeping her voice steady, and so is our business. We don't need the Hendersons. Henry's hand trembled as he pointed at her. You think you know everything because you've been running things for a year. But this farm has been in our family for 4 generations. I won't have you ruin it with your stubbornness. I'm not ruining anything, Charlie said, fighting to keep her composure. Our profits are up 15% from last year. The new breeding program, it's not just about money, Henry interrupted, his face reddening. It's about securing our future. You're not getting any younger, Charlotte. Who's going to take over after you? The same old argument. Charlie had heard it 1,000 times. Her duty to marry well, to have children who would continue the Ashford legacy, as if her own dreams. Didn't matter. I have to go, Dad. I have an early meeting tomorrow. She left before he could say more, hurrying down the hallway with tears stinging her eyes. The mansion that had once been her home now felt like a beautiful prison, every room filled with expectations she couldn't or wouldn't meet. Outside, the night air was cool against her face. Without thinking, her feet carried her toward the stables. They were quiet at this hour, most of the staff gone for the day. The soft sounds of horses settling for the night welcomed her. As she walked past the training area, she heard a low, melodic humming. Following the sound, she found Sawyer in one of the stalls, tending to the new foal. He was sitting on a small stool, gently brushing the young horse while humming a tune she didn't recognize. Charlie stepped back, not wanting to disturb the peaceful scene. But the foal noticed her, ears perking up, causing Sawyer to turn. "Miss Ashford," he said, rising quickly, wincing slightly as he put weight on his bad leg. "Please don't get up," she said. "I was just taking a walk. I didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not interrupting. Little guy here was just a bit restless tonight." Sawyer patted the foal's neck. Charlie approached cautiously. "Does he have a name yet?" "Not officially. Been calling him Hope." "Hope?" Sawyer's weathered face softened. His mother died giving birth to him. Most folks thought he wouldn't make it through the night, but he had other ideas. He paused, looking slightly embarrassed. "Probably not a proper name for a champion, though." "I think it's perfect," Charlie said softly, reaching out to stroke the foal's muzzle. "Hope is exactly what he represents." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both watching the young horse. "You seem to have a special touch with them," Charlie observed. "Especially the troubled ones." Sawyer shrugged. "Just patience, ma'am. Most living things just want to be understood." He hesitated, then added, "If you don't mind me asking, are you all right? You seem upset." Charlie was startled by the question. No one ever asked her how she felt. They only asked about the business, about her father, about when she'd finally settled down. "I'm fine," she said automatically, then sighed. "Just family expectations, nothing new." Sawyer nodded, not pressing further. "Families can be complicated. Do you have family, Mr. Beck?" As soon as the words left her mouth, Charlie regretted the personal question, but Sawyer didn't seem offended. "No, Mom, not anymore. Lost my parents years ago. Never married." He gave a small smile. "It's just me and the horses." Charlie felt an unexpected connection to this quiet man. "Sometimes I think that would be simpler," she admitted. "Simpler, maybe, but lonely too." His voice was so low she almost didn't hear him. Their eyes met briefly and Charlie felt something shift between them, a moment of genuine understanding. The sound of a door closing somewhere in the stables broke the spell. "Should go," Charlie said, suddenly aware of how inappropriate this conversation might appear to others. "Yes, ma'am. Good night." Sawyer tipped his hat, his eyes once again avoiding hers. Charlie walked back to the mansion, her mind filled with thoughts of the gentle cowboy and the unexpected comfort she'd found in his presence. For the first time in months, she felt something other than the crushing weight of obligation. The next morning, Charlie arrived at the training area earlier than necessary. She told herself it was to check on the foal, now mentally calling him Hope. But a part of her knew she was hoping to see Sawyer too. She wasn't disappointed. He was already there, working with one of the older horses, guiding it through a complex training pattern. Charlie stood at the fence, watching his silent communication with the animal. Most trainers she'd known were loud, assertive, making the horses bend to their will. Sawyer was different. He moved with the horse, anticipating its needs, building trust through gentle persistence. When he finally noticed her, he nodded in acknowledgement, but continued his work. Charlie appreciated that he didn't stop or put on a show just because she was watching. "He's looking good," she said, when Sawyer finally brought the horse to a stop near where she stood. Getting there. "He's still a bit stubborn on the right turn, like his owner," Charlie said with a small smile, thinking of Mr. Patterson, the wealthy businessman who'd purchased the horse last month. To her surprise, Sawyer chuckled, a warm, rich sound she'd never heard from him before. "You said it, not me, ma'am. Please call me Charlie, at least when it's just us." "Ma'am makes me feel like my grandmother." Sawyer looked startled by the request, but nodded. "Charlie, then." The way he said her name, with his deep Texas drawl, sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "Miss Ashford," a voice called from across the yard. Marissa was hurrying toward her, tablet in hand. "The Henderson family is here. Your father invited them for brunch. Everyone's waiting for you at the house." Charlie felt her heart sink. Of course her father would arrange this without telling her. "I'll be right there," she said, forcing a smile. To Sawyer, she added, "Duty calls. Will you be working with Hope? Later?" "Yes, around 3. "Good, I'd like to see his progress." It wasn't strictly necessary, but Charlie wanted a reason to return, a reason to escape what was sure to be an uncomfortable brunch. As she walked back to the mansion, Charlie couldn't help comparing Bradford Henderson with his polished manners and calculating smile to the authentic, unassuming cowboy she'd just left behind. The brunch was exactly as she'd expected. Henry Ashford at his manipulative best, the Hendersons dropping hints about joining families, and Bradford watching her like she was another prize thoroughbred to add to his collection. "Charlotte was just telling me about her ideas for the North Pasture," Henry said, giving her a pointed look. "Perhaps you'd like to hear them, Bradford." Charlie hadn't mentioned any such ideas, but she played along, discussing generic improvements to the property. Bradford nodded enthusiastically. "We have similar plans for our east fields. Maybe we should walk the properties together sometime, see how they might fit together." "What a wonderful idea," said Mrs. Henderson, beaming at Charlie. "Bradford just bought the most beautiful stallion from Argentina. You must see it, Charlotte." "Yes, he'd make an excellent match with some of your mares," Mr. Henderson added, the double meaning clear to everyone at the table. Charlie maintained her polite smile, even as she felt suffocated by their expectations. All she could think about was 3 o'clock, when she could escape back to the stables, back to where she felt real, where Sawyer Beck would be working with Hope, asking nothing of her except her presence. "That sounds lovely," she said mechanically, already planning her escape. Because for the first time in years, Charlie Ashford had found someone, who made her want to break free from the perfectly arranged life that had never truly been her own. 3 o'clock couldn't come fast enough for Charlie. The brunch with the Hendersons had dragged on for nearly 2 hours, with Bradford finding every excuse to touch her arm or stand too close. By the time they finally left, with promises to continue the conversation soon, Charlie was desperate for fresh air and honest company. "You could at least try to look interested," Henry Ashford scolded as the Hendersons' car disappeared down the long driveway. "Bradford is one of the most eligible bachelors in Texas, and he knows it," Charlie replied, already walking toward the stairs. "I have work to do, Dad." "The board meeting is tomorrow," he called after her. "They'll want to hear about the Henderson proposal." Charlie paused. "The business proposal or the marriage proposal?" "Don't be dramatic, Charlotte. This is about securing the future of Ashford Meadows." Charlie didn't answer. She went to her room, changed into jeans and a simple blouse, and headed for the stables. She checked her watch. 15 minutes past 3. She hoped Sawyer was still. Working with hope, he was. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the training pen as Sawyer guided the young foal with gentle touches and soft words. The little horse was responding beautifully, following Sawyer's lead without a lead rope. Just trust. Charlie stood at the fence, mesmerized by the quiet communication between man and animal. Sawyer noticed her, but continued his work, giving Hope his full attention. It was only when the training session was complete that he approached her. "You came back," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "I said I would," Charlie replied. "He's doing amazingly well." Sawyer nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. He's a quick learner, trusting too, which is surprising considering his rough start. "You have a gift," Charlie said. "I've been around horses all my life, but I've never seen anyone connect with them the way you do." Sawyer looked embarrassed by the praise. "Just experience, ma'am." "Charlie," he corrected himself. "When you grow up on a ranch, you learn to speak horse before you speak English." "You grew up on a ranch?" "Small place in West Texas. Nothing like this," he gestured at the expansive Ashford property. "Just enough land for a few cattle and 3 horses." Charlie leaned against the fence. "It sounds wonderful." Sawyer gave her a curious look. "Most people don't think so when they hear about the hard work and tight money." "Most people haven't lived in a golden cage," Charlie said, surprising herself with her honesty. A moment of understanding passed between them. Sawyer didn't respond with platitudes about how lucky she was or how she should be grateful. He simply nodded. "Would you like to help with his evening feed?" Sawyer asked, nodding toward Hope. Charlie smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. "I'd love to." They walked to the feed room together, gathering what they needed. Charlie noticed Sawyer's limp was more pronounced today. "Bad day?" she asked, nodding toward his leg. Sawyer looked surprised that she'd noticed. "Weather's changing. Old injuries like to remind you they're there." "From the rodeo fall?" Now he looked truly startled. "You know about that?" Charlie felt her cheeks, warm. "I might have looked at your resume when you were hired. It mentioned you were a rodeo rider. 8 seconds on the back of a bull named Tornado," Sawyer said with a rueful smile. "Except I only made it to 6 before he decided I belonged on the ground." "I'm sorry," Charlie said, realizing how much that injury must have changed his life. Sawyer shrugged. "It was a long time ago. Besides, it led me here." The simple statement hung between them as they walked back to Hope's stall. There was something comforting about working side by side with Sawyer, preparing the feed, checking the water. No pretenses, no expectations, just shared purpose. "I've been thinking about the north pasture," Charlie said as they finished up. "It's not being used for anything right now." "Nice piece of land," Sawyer commented. "Good grass, natural shade from those oak trees. I was thinking it might make a good retirement home for older horses, ones that have finished their competition days but still have years ahead of them." Sawyer looked at her with new interest. "A sanctuary?" Charlie nodded, suddenly self-conscious. "It's just an idea. The board would probably hate it. Not enough profit potential. But you'd be giving something back," Sawyer said. "Horses that have given everything for Ashford Meadows would have a place to spend their golden years in peace." "Exactly," Charlie felt a surge of excitement that he understood. "Most of them end up sold to smaller stables or riding schools. Some just disappear." Sawyer's face darkened. "I know. It's the ugly side of the business. So you don't think it's a silly idea?" "I think it's the best idea I've heard in a long time." Charlie felt a glow of pleasure at his approval. "Maybe someday," she said, not wanting to admit how many of her dreams had been filed away under "maybe someday." "Why not now?" Sawyer asked, his blue eyes meeting hers directly for once. Before Charlie could answer, she heard someone calling her name. Turning, she saw her nephew Tyler running toward them, followed by her sister-in-law Diane. "Aunt Charlie." Tyler threw his arms around her waist. At 10 years old, he was small for his age, with the same Ashford blonde hair as Charlie. "Hey, buddy." Charlie hugged him tight. "I didn't know you were coming today. Mom said we could visit." "While Dad's away," Tyler said, pulling back to look at her. "Can we go see the new horses, please?" Diane approached more slowly, elegant as always in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, her eyes moving between Charlie and Sawyer with obvious curiosity. "You're not interrupting," Charlie assured her. "Diane, This is Sawyer Beck, our head trainer. Sawyer, this is my sister-in-law Diane and my nephew Tyler. Sawyer tipped his hat. Ma'am, young man. Tyler had already spotted Hope and was staring at the foal with fascination. He's so tiny. What's his name? Hope, Charlie and Sawyer answered simultaneously. Diane raised an eyebrow at their synchronicity but didn't comment. Tyler's been talking about the horses non-stop since James told him we were visiting. Tyler, unlike his father James, who was Charlie's older brother, didn't care much about the business side of Ashford Meadows. What he loved were the horses themselves, and despite being on the autism spectrum, or perhaps because of it, he had an uncanny connection with them. Would you like to meet him properly? Sawyer asked Tyler, his voice gentler than Charlie had ever heard it. Tyler looked up at him with wide eyes. Can I? If your mom says it's okay. Sawyer glanced at Diane, who nodded. Let me show you how to approach him without scaring him, Charlie watched in wonder as Sawyer knelt beside Tyler, his bad leg awkwardly extended, and explained in simple, clear terms how to move around a young horse. There was no talking down to the boy, no impatience with his questions, just the same respectful attention Sawyer gave to everyone, human or equine. He's good with him, Diane murmured to Charlie as they watched Tyler follow Sawyer's instructions. Most people don't know how to talk to Tyler. They get frustrated when he doesn't make eye contact or when he asks the same question 3 times. Sawyer understands, Charlie said, unable to keep the admiration from her voice. Diane gave her a sidelong look. I haven't seen you smile like that in ages. Charlie felt her cheeks warm. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do, Diane said quietly. And while I think it's wonderful to see you looking happy for once, you should be careful. Your father would have a fit if he knew you were spending time with a staff member. We're just working together. Charlie protested, though even she could hear the half-truth in her words. Diane said, clearly unconvinced. Just remember, your father still has a lot of influence with the board, and James will be back from New York next week. He's already talking about implementing changes at the estate. Charlie's stomach tightened. Her brother had been pushing for more intensive development of the property, wanting to build luxury condos on part of the land. The last thing Ashford Meadows needed was to become a playground for the wealthy at the expense of the horses. Let's not talk about business now, Charlie said, watching as Tyler gently stroked Hope's nose under Sawyer's watchful eye. Let's just enjoy the afternoon. The next day, Charlie sat through the board meeting with only half her attention on the financial reports. The other half was still in the stables, remembering how Sawyer had shown such patience with Tyler, how natural they'd looked together. Ms. Ashford? Mr. Peterson, one of the oldest board members, was looking at her expectantly. For your thoughts on the Henderson proposal, Charlie straightened in her chair. I think it's premature. The Hendersons are offering far less than the North pasture is worth, and I have other plans for that land. Other plans? Her brother James asked sharply from the far end of the table. He'd returned from New York early, looking every inch the successful businessman in his tailored suit. This is the first I'm hearing of this. I'm developing a proposal for a retirement sanctuary for our older horses, Charlie said, feeling a surge of confidence as she remembered Sawyer's approval. It would generate positive publicity and goodwill in the equestrian community. And how would it generate profit? James asked with barely concealed derision. Not everything is about immediate profit, Charlie replied evenly. This is about sustainability and ethics. Many of our clients are increasingly concerned about what happens to their horses after their competition days are over. A retirement sanctuary would give us a marketing edge. To her surprise, several board members nodded thoughtfully. I'd like to see a detailed proposal at the next meeting, Mrs. Winters said. At 82, she was the oldest board member and had been a friend of Charlie's grandmother. It's an interesting idea. James looked annoyed but said nothing further. When the meeting adjourned, he cornered Charlie in the hallway. What game are you playing? He demanded. The Henderson deal would bring millions to Ashford Meadows. Dad supports it. Dad supports anything that might get me to marry into the right family, Charlie retorted. But this is a business decision, not a personal one. And as CEO, it's my call. James's face hardened. For now. But remember, little sister, I still own 40% of this company, and the board can vote to replace you if they lose confidence in your leadership." With that veiled threat hanging in the air, he strode away, leaving Charlie shaken but determined. That evening, Charlie headed to the stables again, seeking the peace she always found there. She was surprised to find lights on in the small office, adjacent to the tack room. Through the window, she could see Sawyer at the desk, poring over what looked like breeding records. She knocked lightly on the doorframe. Sawyer looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Sorry to disturb you," Charlie said. "I just came to check on Hope." "He's settled for the night," Sawyer said, standing. "Was about to head back to the bunkhouse myself." Charlie nodded, suddenly, feeling awkward. "I mentioned the sanctuary idea to the board today. How'd they take it?" "Mixed reactions. Some were interested, others—" She trailed off, thinking of James's hostility. "Not so much?" Sawyer finished for her. "Exactly." Charlie hesitated, then asked, "Would you have time to help me develop the proposal? You know more about what the horses would need than anyone." Sawyer looked stunned by the request. "You want my input?" "I do, if you're willing." A slow smile spread across his face, the first full smile she'd seen from him. It transformed him, softening the weathered lines around his eyes, highlighting the warmth in his gaze. "I'd be honored to help," he said. "I've got some ideas already, if you'd like to hear them." "I would," Charlie said, returning his smile. "Are you hungry? I could have the kitchen send something down." "I was just going to heat up some beans at the bunkhouse," Sawyer admitted, "but I wouldn't say no to a real meal." Charlie called the house, asking Marissa to arrange for dinner to be brought to the tack room. In the meantime, Sawyer showed her his ideas for the sanctuary. Simple sketches of shelters and paddocks, notes about feeding schedules and healthcare for aging horses. "You've been thinking about this for a while," Charlie observed, touched by the care he'd put into the concept. "Guess I have," Sawyer said, looking slightly embarrassed. "Always seemed wrong to me, how these magnificent animals give everything. They have, then get discarded when they can't perform anymore. Like people," Charlie murmured, thinking of her father's dismissal of her worth if she didn't marry well and produce heirs to the Ashford name. Sawyer's eyes met hers, understanding in their depths. Exactly like people. The dinner arrived. Simple. Fare of grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and fresh bread. They ate at the small table in the tack room, their conversation flowing more easily than Charlie had expected. Sawyer told her about growing up on his family's struggling ranch, about his brief career in the rodeo circuit, about the satisfaction he found in working with difficult horses. Charlie found herself sharing too, her frustration with the board's focus on profit over quality, her father's relentless pressure to marry, her love for the land that had been in her family for generations. "You really care about this place," Sawyer observed as they finished their meal. "I do," Charlie said, "but sometimes I think I'm the only one who sees it as more than just a business." "You're not," Sawyer said quietly. "The hands who work here, they care too. They see how you fight for what's right, even when it's hard." Charlie felt a lump form in her throat at his words. "Thank you for saying that. Sometimes I feel so alone in this." "You're not alone," Sawyer said, his voice low and sincere. His hand moved across the table, not quite touching hers, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of it. "Not if you don't want to be." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken feelings. Charlie found herself leaning forward slightly, drawn by something she couldn't name. The sound of footsteps outside the tack room broke the moment. They both straightened as the door opened and James stepped in, his expression darkening as he took in the scene before him. "Well, isn't this cozy?" he said, his voice cold. "I was looking for you, Charlotte. Didn't expect to find you having a romantic dinner with the help." Sawyer stood immediately, his face carefully blank. "Mr. Ashford." "I'll speak with you later, Beck," James said dismissively. "Right now I need a word with my sister. Alone." Sawyer looked at Charlie, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, letting him know it was okay to leave. "Thank you for your help with the proposal, Mr. Beck," she said formally. "We'll continue tomorrow." Sawyer tipped his hat, his eyes conveying a silent message of support before he limped out, closing the door behind him. James waited until Sawyer's footsteps faded before turning on Charlie. "Have you lost your mind?" Do you have any idea what people would say if they saw you like this? We were working on the sanctuary proposal, Charlie said, keeping her voice steady despite the anger building inside her. Sawyer has valuable insights. Sawyer, is it? James sneered. Very familiar. Does Dad know you're getting close to a ranch hand? I'm 36 years old, James. I don't need Dad's approval for who I work with. Work with? Is that what you call this? James gestured to the remains of their dinner. You're the face of Ashford Meadows. Your reputation affects all of us. My reputation is fine, Charlie snapped. And Sawyer is respected throughout the equestrian community. His work has already improved our training program significantly. He's an employee, Charlotte, a hired hand with a bad leg and no prospects. He lives in the bunkhouse, for God's sake. And that makes him unworthy of basic respect? Charlie demanded, her temper rising. Of sharing a meal and a conversation with me? James shook his head, his expression a mixture of anger and something like pity. You don't get it, do you? The board is already questioning your judgment over this sanctuary idea. If they thought you were getting involved with an employee, they'd have grounds to remove you as CEO. The threat hung in the air between them. Charlie knew he wasn't bluffing. The board was old-fashioned and conservative. Any hint of scandal would give them the excuse they needed to put James in charge. What do you want, James? She asked tiredly. I want you to be sensible. The Henderson deal is good for business. Bradford is a suitable match for you. And this, he gestured around the tack room, this needs to stop before it becomes a problem. Charlie felt a cold anger settle in her chest. Are you threatening me? I'm trying to protect the family business, James replied. Think about it, Charlotte. Is a fling with a cowboy worth losing everything our family has built? He left without waiting for her answer, the door swinging shut behind him. Charlie sat alone in the suddenly silent tack room, James's words echoing in her mind. Was she really risking everything? The estate, her position, the sanctuary that was barely more than a dream, for feelings she wasn't even sure she understood. But even as doubt crept in, she remembered Sawyer's words. You're not alone, not if you don't want to be. For the first time in years, Charlie Ashford knew exactly what she wanted. The question was whether she had the courage to reach for it, and what price she might have to pay if she did. The morning after her confrontation with James, Charlie arrived at the office earlier than usual. She spread the sanctuary proposal materials across her desk, determined to make it so thorough and financially sound that even James couldn't object. If she could prove that the sanctuary would benefit Ashford Meadows' reputation and ultimately its bottom line, the board might back her. She was deep in spreadsheets when Marissa knocked on her door. Your father is asking for you, her assistant said. He says it's urgent. Charlie's stomach tightened. She had no doubt that James had already spoken to their father about finding her with Sawyer. Tell him I'll be there in 10 minutes, Charlie said, saving her work. Henry Ashford was waiting in his study, his wheelchair positioned by the window overlooking the main training arena where, at that moment, Sawyer was working with one of their prize stallions. Beautiful animal, Henry commented as Charlie entered. Beck has done wonders with him. Skittish as a newborn fawn when we bought him. Now look at him. Charlie was surprised by the praise. Yes, Sawyer has a special touch. Sawyer, is it? Henry turned his wheelchair to face her, his expression hardening. James tells me you two have become quite friendly. We're working together on the sanctuary proposal, Charlie said, determined to keep her voice steady. His expertise is invaluable. His expertise, Henry repeated, his tone making the words sound dirty. Do you know what people are saying? Charlotte, the stable hands, the maids, they talk. They've seen how often you visit the stables these days, how you're always finding reasons to speak with him. Is it so strange that I'd want to know what's happening with our horses? Charlie, challenged? Don't play innocent, you're not a child, Henry snapped. You're the CEO of Ashford Meadows and an Ashford. Your reputation affects this entire family and business. My reputation is spotless, Charlie said, anger building in her chest. Unless you count ending an engagement to a man who only wanted me for the Ashford name. At least James knew his place in society. Henry's face was reddening, a dangerous sign given his health condition. Beck is a hired hand, Charlotte. A drifter with a bad leg and nothing to offer except the ability to whisper to horses. He's one of the most respected trainers in Texas, Charlie argued. And he's kind and honest and you're falling for him, Henry cut in, his voice suddenly quieter but no less angry. I can see it in your face. The same foolish look your mother had when she threw away everything for a summer fling. Charlie froze. What did you say? Henry looked away, seeming to regret his words. Nothing. It doesn't matter now. It does matter, Charlie insisted, moving closer to her father's wheelchair. What are you talking about? What summer fling? Henry was silent for a long moment, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair. Finally, he sighed heavily. Your mother wasn't always the perfect Ashford wife, you remember, he said, his voice low. The summer before you were born, she became involved with someone. A ranch hand who worked here said she was in love with him. He practically spat the word love. She was going to leave me, leave everything, to run off with him. Charlie felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. Mum, but she was always so devoted to you, to Ashford Meadows. Because I gave her a choice, Henry said coldly. Him or her children. She chose you and James, as she should have. But she was never the same after that. Part of her died when she gave him up. Charlie remembered her mother's quiet sadness, the distant look in her eyes that would appear sometimes when she thought no one was watching. It made a terrible kind of sense. Who was he? Charlie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man she loved? It doesn't matter, he's long gone, Henry said dismissively. What matters is that history is repeating itself, and I won't stand by and watch you destroy your life and this family's legacy for a man who doesn't belong in our world. That should be my choice to make, Charlie said, finding her voice again. It is your choice, Henry agreed, his tone turning calculating. But choices have consequences. If you continue this, whatever it is with Beck, I'll have no choice but to support James's petition to the board to remove you as CEO. Charlie stared at her father, the man she'd spent her life trying to please. You'd do that. You'd turn against your own daughter. I'd be saving you from yourself, Henry insisted, just like I saved your mother. You didn't save her, Charlie said, the truth suddenly clear to her. You trapped her in a life she didn't want, and she spent the rest of her days trying to make the best of it. She had everything a woman could want, Henry's voice rose. A beautiful home, financial security, respect in the community, everything except love, Charlie finished for him. Everything except the freedom to choose her own path. Henry's face hardened. You have until the next board meeting to come to your senses. Either end this inappropriate relationship with Beck and start taking the Henderson proposal seriously, or prepare to step down as CEO. Charlie left her father's study with her head spinning. The revelation about her mother changed everything. Suddenly, her childhood memories were cast in a different light. The way her mother would sometimes stand at the window, staring out at the stables with a wistful expression. The songs she would hum when she thought she was alone. Sad, longing melodies that had always made Charlie's heart ache without knowing why. She needed time to think, to process what she'd learned. But the day's schedule was relentless. Meetings with clients, calls with vendors, paperwork that couldn't wait. It was after 7 in the evening when she finally escaped to the stables, drawn there by an instinct she no longer tried to deny. Sawyer was in the small office, looking troubled as he reviewed some papers. He stood when he saw her in the doorway. Charlie, he said, looking relieved, I wasn't sure if you'd come today. Why wouldn't I? She asked, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. Sawyer ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. Your brother made it pretty clear last night that he doesn't approve of us spending time together. James doesn't control who I see, Charlie said, with more confidence than she felt. She noticed the papers on his desk, transport authorization forms. What are those for? Sawyer hesitated before answering. I got a job offer today, training position at a stable in Montana. Charlie felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. Montana? But you've only been here 8 months. Sometimes it's better to move on before things get complicated, Sawyer said, not quite meeting her eyes. What things? Charlie pressed, fear making her voice sharper than she intended. Us, you mean? Sawyer finally looked at her, his blue eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite name. I've been in this business a long time, Charlie. I know what happens when someone like me gets too close to someone like you. It never ends well. Someone like me? Charlie repeated, stepping closer to him. What exactly am I like, Sawyer? You know what I mean, he said, his voice rough with frustration. You're Charlie Ashford. You live in that big house on the hill. Your family name is on half the buildings. In Austin, and I'm the man I can't stop thinking about, Charlie finished for him, her heart pounding. The only person who sees me as more than just an Ashford. Sawyer stared at her, stunned by her words. Charlie, did James threaten you? She asked, suddenly understanding his abrupt decision to leave. Or was it my father? Sawyer's silence. Was answer enough? What did they say to you? Charlie demanded. It doesn't matter, Sawyer said tiredly. They're right, Charlie. I don't belong here. I don't belong in your world. That's not for them to decide, Charlie insisted, moving even closer to him. And it's not for you to decide either. It's my choice who belongs in my life. Is it? Sawyer asked quietly. Your brother made it pretty clear that your position here depends on making the right choices. I won't be the reason you lose everything you've worked for. What if I don't want everything? Charlie asked, her voice breaking slightly. What if I just want something real, something honest? The air between them seemed to vibrate with tension. Sawyer lifted his hand as if to touch her face, then let it fall back to his side. I can't offer you the life you deserve, he said, his voice low and pained. You don't get to decide what I deserve, Charlie replied, reaching out to take his hand. That's my choice too. Sawyer looked down at their joined hands, then back up to her face. The vulnerability in his eyes made her heart ache. I found out something today, Charlie said softly, about my mother. She fell in love with a ranch hand the summer before I was born. She wanted to leave my father for him, but she was forced to choose between him and her children. Sawyer's expression changed to one of surprise, then understanding. And now your father thinks history is repeating itself, Charlie nodded. He's threatening to support James's bid to remove me as CEO if I don't end things with you. She laughed without humor, which is ironic, since there aren't even things between us to end. Aren't there? Sawyer asked, his voice barely audible. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Charlie knew that whatever was happening between them was far too powerful to be denied or dismissed. Without overthinking it, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. Sawyer remained still for a heartbeat. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close as he returned her kiss with a hunger that matched her own. It was as if something that had been building between them for months had finally been set free. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Sawyer rested his forehead against hers. We're asking for trouble, he murmured. Maybe trouble is exactly what Ashford Meadows needs, Charlie replied with a small smile. Maybe it's what I need. Sawyer cupped her face in his calloused hands. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything. You won't be, Charlie assured him, covering his hands with her own. I have a plan for the sanctuary. If I can prove it's financially viable, the board will have to listen. And if they still try to force me out, well, she took a deep breath. Maybe it's time for me to find out who I am without the Ashford name defining me. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. For her entire life, Charlie had been an Ashford first and a person second. The idea of walking away from everything she'd ever known was frightening, but the prospect of a life without Sawyer in it was somehow more frightening still. It won't come to that, Sawyer said, determination hardening his voice. We'll make the sanctuary plan so strong they can't ignore it. I know people, retired trainers, vets who work pro bono, sponsors who might be willing to donate. We can make this happen, Charlie. His belief in her, in them, filled Charlie with a confidence she'd never felt before. For the first time, she wasn't fighting alone. So you're not going to Montana? She asked, trying to keep her tone light despite the fear still lingering in her heart. Sawyer's smile was slow and warm. Turns out, I have a better offer right here. Over the next 2 weeks, Charlie and Sawyer worked tirelessly on the sanctuary proposal. By day, they maintained a professional distance, aware of the watchful eyes of James and others on the estate. But in the evenings, they met in the tack room or Sawyer's small office, poring over plans, making calls to potential donors, and building a vision that grew more real with each passing day. And sometimes when the work was done, they would simply talk, sharing stories, dreams, fears, learning each other in the quiet hours when the rest of the world seemed far away. Occasionally, those conversations would turn to kisses, tender at first, then increasingly passionate. But Sawyer always pulled back before things went too far, his respect for Charlie and the precariousness of their situation holding him in check. "We have time," he would say, pressing a final kiss to her forehead or the palm of her hand. "When things are settled, when we don't have to hide." Charlie understood, even as her body protested the restraint. There was too much at stake. Too many eyes watching, too many rumors already circulating among the staff. They needed to be careful, at least until after the board meeting. But secrets have a way of escaping, especially in a place like Ashford Meadows, where the walls seemed to have ears and the staff noticed everything. It was Tyler who inadvertently brought things to a head. He had been spending more time at the estate, drawn by his love for the horses and his growing bond with Sawyer, who always made time for the boy despite their busy schedule. One afternoon, Tyler came running into Henry's study where Charlie was reviewing the final sanctuary proposal with her father. "Aunt Charlie, Sawyer says Hope is ready for a proper ride. He says I can sit on him if you come too." The boy's excitement was palpable. Henry's eyes narrowed at the casual way Tyler spoke of Sawyer. "You've been spending quite a lot of time with Mr. Beck, haven't you, Charlotte?" Tyler, unaware of the tension, continued enthusiastically. "Sawyer's teaching me all about horses, and he told me about the special place he's building with Aunt Charlie for the old horses to live. He says it's going to be the most beautiful part of Ashford Meadows." Charlie saw her father's expression darken. "Tyler, honey, why don't you go tell your mom where you are? I'll meet you at the stables in a few minutes." Once Tyler had left, Henry turned to Charlie, anger evident in every line of his face. "So it continues, despite my warning. And now you've involved Tyler in this inappropriate relationship." "So there's nothing inappropriate about Tyler learning from one of the best horse trainers in Texas," Charlie said evenly. "And yes, Sawyer is helping me with the sanctuary. His expertise is invaluable." "Is that all he's providing? Expertise?" Henry's voice dripped with insinuation. Charlie felt her cheeks flame, but she kept her voice steady. "The sanctuary proposal is ready for the board meeting tomorrow. I think you'll find it addresses all your concerns about financial viability." "The board meeting has been moved up," Henry said coldly. "James called an emergency session for this. Afternoon, they're meeting at 3. Charlie felt her heart drop. "What? Why wasn't I informed? I'm the CEO." "Because the first item on the agenda is a vote on your leadership," Henry said. "James has gathered enough support to challenge your position. He's presenting his vision for Ashford Meadows, including the Henderson merger and the development of luxury condos on the North Pasture." "That's my proposal," Charlie protested, gesturing to the thick folder in her hands. "You can't just decide my future without giving me a chance to present my plan." "You had your chance," Henry said, wheeling his chair away from her. "You chose to waste it on a summer romance, just like your mother. The board meeting is at 3. I suggest you prepare yourself for the outcome." Charlie felt as if the floor were tilting beneath her feet. 8 board members, including Henry and James, would vote on her future. She needed 5 votes to maintain her position. Mrs. Winters would support her, she was certain. Mr. Peterson probably would too. But the others, they had always been more aligned with her father's traditional vision for Ashford Meadows. She rushed from her father's study, needing to find Sawyer to tell him what was happening. But as she reached the main hall, she stopped short at the sight that greeted her. Bradford Henderson stood in the entryway, deep in conversation with James. Both men turned to look at her as she approached, James with a smug smile, Bradford with the entitled confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. "Charlotte," Bradford greeted her, stepping forward to take her hand before she could protest. "You look lovely as always. I hope you don't mind my stopping by. James thought it might be good for me to attend the board meeting today," Charlie pulled her hand from his, struggling to maintain her composure. "And why would that be necessary, Mr. Henderson?" "Bradford," he corrected with a practiced smile. "And given that our families are on the verge of a significant merger, both personal and professional, it seemed appropriate. Charlie looked at James, fury building inside her. Personal merger? Is that what you're calling it now? James's smile didn't waver. Bradford has formally asked for your hand in marriage, with Dad's blessing, of course. The announcement will be made after the board meeting, assuming all goes as expected. You can't be serious, Charlie said, looking between the two men. I haven't agreed to marry anyone. It's the sensible choice, Charlotte, Bradford said, his condescending tone making her skin crawl. Our family names together will create the most powerful equestrian empire in Texas. And at 36, it's not as if you have a lot of options left. Charlie had never wanted to slap someone so badly in her life. Instead, she straightened her spine and fixed Bradford with a cold stare. Mr. Henderson, let me be perfectly clear, I will never marry you. Not today, not tomorrow, not if you were the last man in Texas. And as for the business merger, that will be decided by the board this afternoon when I present my alternative proposal. Bradford's smile faltered. James assured me. James doesn't. Speak for me, Charlie cut him off. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a board meeting to prepare for. She walked away with her head high, not giving either man a chance to respond. She needed to find Sawyer, and she needed to prepare for the fight of her life. She found him in the training ring with Tyler, who was sitting proudly on Hope's back while Sawyer led the young horse in gentle circles. The sight of them together made Charlie's heart twist painfully. There was so much at stake, not just her position or the sanctuary, but this fragile happiness she'd found with Sawyer. Tyler, can you go find your mom for a bit? Charlie called, forcing a smile for her nephew's benefit. I need to speak with Sawyer about something important. Tyler reluctantly slid off Hope's back, giving the foal's neck a final pat before running off toward the house. Sawyer handed Hope to one of the stable hands before walking over to Charlie, concern evident on his face. What's wrong? He asked, his voice low. Everything, Charlie said, fighting to keep her composure. James has called an emergency board. Meeting for this afternoon. They're going to vote on whether to keep me as CEO. Sawyer's expression darkened. Because of us? Because of the sanctuary, the Henderson deal. The development plans for the North Pasture, us, Charlie confirmed. All of it. And to top it off, James and my father have apparently accepted a marriage proposal from Bradford Henderson on my behalf. They're planning to announce it after the meeting. They can't do that, Sawyer said, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. It's not 1950. They can't just marry you off without your consent. They can try, Charlie said grimly. And if I lose the CEO position, I lose any power I have to block the Henderson merger. They'll develop the North Pasture, and the sanctuary will never happen. Sawyer was quiet for a moment, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Maybe I should go, he finally said. If I leave, they might... No, Charlie cut him off firmly. That's exactly what they want. They think if they threaten me enough, pressure me enough, I'll give in and be the obedient Ashford daughter they've always wanted. She took his hands in hers, not caring who might see. But that's not who I am, Sawyer, not anymore. His fingers tightened around hers. What are you going to do? Fight, Charlie said simply. With everything I have. The board meeting is at 3. I'm going to present our sanctuary proposal and make them see that there's a better way forward for Ashford Meadows than luxury condos and loveless marriages. And if they don't listen? Sawyer asked quietly. Charlie took a deep breath. Then I walk away. From the CEO position, from Ashford Meadows, from all of it. Charlie, no, Sawyer protested. This is your legacy, your birthright. Maybe, Charlie agreed. But what's a legacy worth if I have to sacrifice my own happiness to preserve it? My mother made that choice, and it broke something inside her. I won't make the same mistake, Sawyer pulled her into his arms, holding her tight as if he could protect her from what was coming. Whatever happens in that boardroom, I'm here, he promised. We'll figure it out together. For a moment, Charlie let herself lean into his strength, drawing comfort from the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. Then she pulled back, determination replacing the fear in her eyes. I need to prepare, she said. Will you meet me after the meeting, no matter what happens? Wild horses couldn't keep me away, Sawyer promised, pressing a kiss to her forehead. As Charlie walked back to the house, Her sanctuary proposal clutched to her chest. She felt a strange sense of calm settling over her. For the first time in her life, she was fighting not just for Ashford Meadows, but for herself, for the chance to live a life that was truly her own. The board meeting would either be the beginning of a new chapter for Ashford Meadows or the EC, end of her time there. Either way, Charlie knew that after today, nothing would ever be the same again. The Ashford Meadows boardroom was silent as Charlie finished presenting her sanctuary proposal. The large oak table was surrounded by the 8 board members, their expressions giving little away as they reviewed the materials in front of them. As you can see, Charlie concluded, the sanctuary will not only provide ethical retirement for our horses, but will also generate positive publicity and goodwill. The sponsorship commitments I've secured will cover the initial setup costs, and the operational budget is sustainable through the proposed partnership with the Texas Equine Veterinary Association. She took a deep breath, looking at each face around the table. Mrs. Winters was nodding slightly, a good sign. Mr. Peterson looked thoughtful. The others were harder to read, their eyes occasionally darting to Henry at the head of the table. "Thank you, Charlotte," James said smoothly, standing up as she sat down. "It's an interesting proposal. However, I think the board needs to consider the bigger picture." He clicked a remote and the screen at the end of the room lit up with images of modern, luxurious buildings nestled among green hills. The Henderson proposal offers immediate financial returns. Their offer for the North Pasture alone would increase our cash reserves by $15 million. The luxury equestrian condos would attract wealthy clients and increase our boarding revenue by an estimated 30%. James continued his presentation, his voice confident as he outlined the benefits of merging with the Henderson estate. Charlie watched the board members' faces, her heart sinking as she saw several of them nodding in agreement. When James finished, Henry spoke up. "The floor is now open for questions before we vote on the 2 proposals and subsequently on the leadership of Ashford Meadows moving forward." Mrs. Winters raised her hand first. "I have a question for Charlotte. This sanctuary idea is certainly compassionate, but what happens to these horses as they reach the end of their lives? The medical costs for geriatric equine care can be substantial." Charlie was prepared for this. "We've partnered with 3 veterinary schools who will provide care at reduced rates in exchange for allowing their students to gain experience with older horses. Additionally, the proposal includes an endowment fund specifically for medical expenses." Mrs. Winters nodded, seemingly satisfied. Mr. Calloway, one of the older board members, spoke next. "James, these luxury condos look impressive, but how will construction affect our current operations? We can't have heavy machinery and noise disturbing the training programs." "The Henderson team has assured us that construction can be phased to minimize disruption," James replied smoothly. "And the temporary inconvenience would be well worth the long-term benefits." The questions continued, with Charlie fighting for her vision and James countering with promises of profit and growth. As the discussion wound down, Charlie could feel the momentum shifting away from her. Too many of the board members were nodding at James's points, their faces showing concern at what they clearly saw as Charlie's impractical idealism. "Before we vote," Henry said, "I'd like to remind the board that this decision is about more than just business. It's about the legacy of Ashford Meadows. For 4 generations, this estate has been among the most prestigious in Texas. The Henderson merger would secure that position for generations to come." He didn't need to mention the personal merger, the expected marriage between Charlie and Bradford. Everyone in the room knew it was part of the package. "If I may say one last thing," Charlie said, rising from her seat again. She hadn't planned this final appeal, but the words came from somewhere deep inside her. "My great-grandfather founded Ashford Meadows because he loved horses, not just as business assets, but as partners, as creatures worthy of respect and care. The sanctuary honors that original vision. It says that at Ashford Meadows we value more than just the bottom line. We remember why we started doing this in the first place." She looked directly at her father as she continued. "I understand the appeal of the Henderson proposal. It's safe, it's profitable. But it turns Ashford Meadows into just another luxury development. Is that really the legacy we want to leave?" Henry's face remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes, a moment of uncertainty, perhaps even regret. "Thank you, Charlotte," he said quietly. "Let's proceed with the vote." Charlie sat down, her hands trembling slightly under the table. This was it, the moment that would decide her future and the future of Ashford Meadows. All those in favor of the Henderson development proposal, Henry said. 4 hands went up immediately. James, Henry, and 2 board members known for their conservative business approach. All those in favor of the sanctuary proposal. Mrs. Winter's hand shot up without hesitation. Mr. Peterson followed more slowly. Charlie held her breath as Mr. Calloway's hand wavered, then finally rose. 3 votes for each proposal. It all came down to Mrs. Henderson, the youngest board member, who had remained quiet throughout the meeting. "Mrs. Henderson?" Henry prompted. "Your vote?" The woman looked uncomfortable, her eyes darting between Henry and Charlie. I'm not sure either proposal fully addresses what Ashford Meadows needs." "You must vote one way or the other," Henry insisted. Mrs. Henderson took a deep breath. "In that case, I vote for the sanctuary proposal, but with the condition that we also explore scaled-down versions of the residential development for other portions of the property." Charlie felt a surge of relief. 4 votes for her proposal. It was a tie. Henry's face darkened. "In the case of a tie, as board chairman, I cast the deciding vote. I vote for the Henderson proposal." Charlie felt as if all the air had been sucked from the room, after everything she had lost. "Now for the matter of leadership," Henry continued, his voice hard. "Given the board's support for the Henderson development, I move that we consider new leadership for Ashford Meadows, someone more aligned with this vision." "I second the motion," James said quickly. "Wait," Mrs. Winters interrupted, her voice sharp despite her 82 years. "The vote was a tie, Henry. That hardly constitutes a clear mandate for change, and your deciding vote is hardly impartial, given that it's your daughter's position at stake." Mr. Peterson nodded. "I agree. I voted for the sanctuary because I believe it has merit, not because I lack confidence in Charlotte's leadership. Quite the contrary. The sanctuary proposal shows vision and innovation." "The motion has been seconded," Henry insisted. "We will vote on whether to retain Charlotte as CEO or to appoint James in her place." Charlie stood up, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "Before you vote, I'd like to say something. If the board chooses the Henderson proposal, I will respect that decision. But I cannot in good conscience lead Ashford Meadows down a path I believe betrays its founding principles. If James is appointed CEO, I will resign from the board entirely and sell my shares in the company." Gasps echoed around the table. Charlie owned 25% of Ashford Meadows. Combined with James's 40%, the siblings controlled the majority of the company. If Charlie sold her shares, especially to an outside buyer, it could destabilize the entire operation. "You wouldn't dare," Henry said, his face pale with shock. "This is your heritage, your birthright." "It's also my life," Charlie replied simply. "And I won't spend it compromising on what matters most to me." A tense silence fell over the room. Finally, Mrs. Winters spoke. "I think we should adjourn this meeting and reconvene tomorrow. Clearly, there are personal matters at play here that need to be resolved before we make any decisions about leadership." Mr. Peterson and Mr. Calloway quickly agreed. Even Mrs. Henderson nodded, looking relieved at the prospect of postponing the difficult decision. "Fine," Henry conceded, his voice tight with anger. "We'll reconvene tomorrow at 10. But Charlotte, think carefully about what you're threatening. Once you sell your birthright, you can never get it back." The words echoed in Charlie's mind as she left the boardroom. Her birthright. Was that really all Ashford Meadows was to her? A piece of property, a business, a name? Or was it something more, a responsibility, a legacy, a home? And if she walked away from it all, what would be left? Who would she be without the Ashford name defining her? As she stepped outside, the late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the estate. Without thinking, her feet carried her toward the stables, toward the one person who saw her as more than just an Ashford. Sawyer was waiting in the small office, his face tight with concern as she entered. "How did it go?" "It's a tie," Charlie said, sinking into a chair. My father cast the deciding vote for the Henderson proposal. They want to vote on replacing me with James, but the meeting was adjourned until tomorrow. Sawyer knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. I'm sorry, Charlie. I know how much the sanctuary means to you. I told them I'd sell my shares if they appoint James as CEO, Charlie confessed. I threatened to walk away from everything. Would you really do that? Sawyer asked quietly. Charlie looked into his eyes, finding strength in their steady blue depths. Yes, I would, because I've realized something today, Sawyer. Ashford Meadows isn't just land and horses and money. It's a vision that started with my great-grandfather and that I'm trying to honor in my own way. If the board doesn't share that vision, then maybe it's time for me to build something new. Sawyer's expression was a mixture of admiration and concern. What would you do? Where would you go? Charlie hadn't thought that far ahead, but looking at Sawyer, a sense of clarity came over her. I don't know exactly, but I have some savings, and with my experience I could start something smaller, something true to what I believe in. She paused, gathering her courage. The question is, would you come with me? The words hung in the air between them. Charlie held her breath, suddenly afraid she'd asked too much, moved too quickly. Sawyer's answer was to pull her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that left no doubt about his feelings. When they finally broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. Wherever you go, I go. That's not even a question. Charlie felt tears stinging her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally finding someone who chose her. Just her, not the Ashford name or fortune. I may have nothing to offer you but myself, she whispered. That's all I've ever wanted, Sawyer replied, his voice rough with emotion. They were so absorbed in each other that neither heard the door open until a throat cleared behind them. They jumped apart to find Henry Ashford in the doorway, his wheelchair framed by the setting sun. Dad, Charlie said, instinctively moving to stand between her father and Sawyer. What are you doing here? Henry's face was unreadable as he wheeled himself further into the small office. I came to see for myself, he said quietly. See what? Charlie asked, her chin lifting defiantly. If it was real, Henry replied, surprising her. If what you feel for him is real, or if it's just rebellion against me, against the life I planned for you. Charlie felt Sawyer's steady presence behind, her giving her strength. It's real, Dad. More real than anything I've ever felt. Henry's eyes moved to Sawyer. And you? What do you want from my daughter? Her money? Her position? Sawyer met the older man's gaze without flinching. Sir, with all due respect, I don't want anything from Charlie except her happiness. If that means walking away from Ashford Meadows together, that's what we'll do. Henry stared at him for a long moment, then surprised them both by laughing, a short, humorless sound. You know, that's almost exactly what he said. Who? Charlie asked, though she already suspected the answer. Robert Miller. Your mother's ranch hand. Henry's voice softened with memory. He said he'd take her away from all this, give her a simple life, filled with love instead of obligation. Charlie felt a shiver run down her spine at the name. What happened to him? Henry sighed heavily. He left after your mother chose to stay, went up to Wyoming, I heard, started a small ranch of his own. He paused, his eyes distant. She used to keep track of him, you know. Reading articles about his horses in breeding magazines, following his success from afar. It was the one thing I could never take away from her, her memories of him. Charlie felt as if the floor was shifting beneath her feet. Did she regret it, staying with you? Henry was quiet for so long that Charlie thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. She never said so. But sometimes I'd catch her looking at you and James with such love, and then her eyes would turn so sad. I think she made the only choice she could live with, but it broke something in her that never quite healed. He looked up at Charlie, his eyes suddenly clear and penetrating. Is that what you want, Charlotte? A life of might-have-beens and quiet regrets? No, Charlie said firmly. That's why I'm choosing differently. I'm choosing love and purpose, not one or the other. Henry nodded slowly as if coming to a decision. The Henderson development will happen, he said. The board has spoken and I cast my vote. But, he hesitated, perhaps there's room for compromise. Charlie felt a flicker of hope. What kind of compromise? The north pasture is 30 acres. The Henderson plan calls for developing all of it. But what if we set aside 10 acres for your sanctuary? Start small. Prove the concept. If it works, as well as you believe it will, perhaps we can expand it in the future. Charlie could hardly believe what she was hearing. Are you serious? I'm not promising anything, Henry cautioned. The board would need to approve the modified plan, but if you're willing to work with the Hendersons on the development of the remaining 20 acres, I think they might be amenable, especially if it means keeping you as CEO. Charlie glanced at Sawyer, who gave her an encouraging nod. I'd need some guarantees that the sanctuary portion would be protected, she said, turning back to her father. A legal covenant that it can never be developed, no matter who owns Ashford Meadows in the future. Henry's lips twitched into what might almost have been a smile. Always the negotiator. You're more like me than you want to admit. Maybe in some ways, Charlie conceded. But in others, I'm more like Mom. I know what matters to me and I won't give it up without a fight. Henry's eyes moved between Charlie and Sawyer, his expression softening fractionally. No, I can see that you won't. He sighed heavily. If your Mr. Beck truly makes you happy, then I won't stand in your way. Charlie felt tears stinging her eyes. It wasn't full acceptance, not yet, but it was a beginning. Thank you, Dad. Henry straightened in his wheelchair, his moment of vulnerability passing. Don't thank me yet. You'll still have to convince the board and the Hendersons to accept the modified plan. And as for Bradford, I'll handle Bradford, Charlie said firmly. I never agreed to marry him, and I never will. The Hendersons won't like that, Henry warned. Then they'll have to decide what matters more to them, a marriage alliance or a business deal that still stands to make them millions, Charlie replied. And they should know that if they try to pressure me, I'm fully prepared to walk away and take my shares with me. Henry studied her for a long moment, then nodded. You've changed, Charlotte. There's a strength in you now that I haven't seen before. Charlie glanced at Sawyer, her heart full. I've always been strong, Dad. I just needed someone who saw that strength instead of trying to control it. Henry cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional turn of the conversation. Yes, well, I'll speak to James about the modified proposal tonight. We'll present it to the board tomorrow. He began to wheel himself toward the door, then paused. Mr. Beck? Yes, sir, Sawyer replied. If you hurt my daughter, all the horses in Texas won't be able to run fast enough to save you, Henry said, his voice deceptively mild. Sawyer's lips twitched. Understood, sir. After Henry left, Charlie collapsed against Sawyer, emotions finally overwhelming her. I can't believe that just happened, she whispered against his chest. Your father loves you, Sawyer said, stroking her hair, in his own complicated way. I think he loved my mother too, Charlie replied. He just never understood that love isn't about possession. It's about letting someone be who they truly are. Sawyer tilted her face up to his. And who are you truly, Charlie Ashford? She smiled, the answer coming easily now. I'm a woman who loves horses and the land they run on. I'm someone who wants to build something meaningful, something that honors both the past and the future. And, she reached up to touch his face, I'm someone who's falling in love with a cowboy who sees me for exactly who I am. That's a coincidence, Sawyer murmured, pulling her closer. Because I happen to be a cowboy who's already fallen for a strong, beautiful woman who fights for what she believes in. Their lips met in a kiss that felt like a promise, not just for now, but for all the days to come. The next morning, Charlie stood nervously before the board, presenting the modified proposal. To her surprise, James didn't object. Whether Henry had convinced him, or he'd simply realized he couldn't win against Charlie's threat to sell her shares, he sat quietly as she outlined the compromise. The vote was unanimous in favor of the modified plan, and for Charlie to continue as CEO. Even Bradford Henderson, invited to hear the new proposal, grudgingly agreed that it could work, though his eyes were cold when they rested on Charlie. She knew he wouldn't forgive her rejection easily, but that was a battle for another day. As the meeting adjourned, Mrs. Winters caught Charlie's arm. Your mother would be proud, the older woman said softly. She always hoped you'd find your own path. Charlie felt a lump form in her throat. Did you know about her and Robert Miller? Mrs. Winters nodded. I was her friend before I was a board member. I saw what giving him up cost her. She squeezed Charlie's hand. Don't make the same mistake. Some things are worth fighting for, even when it's hard. I know, Charlie said, glancing out the window toward the stables where Sawyer would be waiting to hear the news. I've learned to knit lesson well. 6 months later, the sanctuary welcomed its first residents, 3 retired show jumpers and an elderly dressage champion whose owner couldn't bear the thought of selling him. The simple but elegant shelters Sawyer had designed were a perfect blend of function and comfort, with spacious paddocks where the horses could roam freely. Charlie stood at the fence, watching as Sawyer worked with one of the older geldings, his hands gentle on the horse's aged muscles. Hope, now nearly grown, grazed peacefully nearby, a symbol of everything they'd fought for and won. Not a bad view, Diane commented, joining Charlie at the fence. The horses are beautiful too. Charlie laughed, not bothering to pretend she hadn't been admiring Sawyer. It's all coming together better than I hoped. Tyler's so excited about the summer program, Diane said. He talks non-stop about helping with the retired horses. The educational program had been Sawyer's idea, inviting children like Tyler to learn about horse care through interaction with the gentle retirees. It was already proving to be one of the most popular aspects of the sanctuary. He has a gift. With them, Charlie said. Sawyer says he might make a good trainer someday. Speaking of gifts, Diane said casually, have you set a date yet? Charlie looked down at the simple diamond ring on her finger, still new enough that she sometimes found herself staring at it in wonder. Sawyer had proposed 3 weeks ago, on a moonlit ride across the sanctuary fields. It had been perfect. Just the two of them, the horses, and a future full of promise stretching before them. Next spring, Charlie replied. When the bluebonnets are blooming, we'll have the ceremony right here at the sanctuary. Henry will have a fit about you not getting married in the main house, Diane predicted. Charlie smiled. Actually, he's the one who suggested the sanctuary. Said it was where we found each other, so it should be where we start our life together. Diane looked surprised. He's really come around, hasn't he? Slowly, Charlie agreed. I think seeing me happy has helped, and Sawyer's gift with the horses has earned his respect even if he'd never admit it out loud. The development on the rest of the North Pasture was underway, though Charlie had insisted on sustainable building practices and a design that worked with the natural landscape rather than against it. It wasn't the outcome she'd originally envisioned, but the compromise had brought unexpected benefits, including a contractual agreement that a percentage of the profits would go directly to maintaining and eventually expanding the sanctuary. As if sensing her thoughts, Sawyer looked up and caught her eye across the paddock. His smile still made her heart skip, even after all these months. He said something to the stable hand working with him, then made his way over to where Charlie and Diane stood. Ladies, he greeted them, tipping his hat. His limp was less pronounced. These days, the result of a new therapy program Charlie had insisted he try. What do you think of Old Thunder's progress? He looks like a different horse, Diane said truthfully. The once dejected gelding was now holding his head high, his coat gleaming with health. Just needed someone to believe in him again, Sawyer said, his eyes meeting Charlie's. Diane glanced between them and smiled. I think I'll go find Tyler. He wanted to show me how he's teaching that miniature pony to bow. As she walked away, Sawyer leaned against the fence beside Charlie, his arm brushing hers. Had a call from the Morgan farm in Kentucky, he said. They're retiring 3 of their older broodmares, asked if we'd have room for them. Already? We've only been open 6 months and we're almost at capacity, Charlie said, both concerned and pleased by the sanctuary's success. Might need to think about that expansion sooner rather than later, Sawyer suggested. Charlie nodded thoughtfully. The East Meadow might work. I'll talk to the board about it next month. She turned to face him, a smile playing on her lips. Look at us, planning. For the future like proper grown-ups, Sawyer chuckled, pulling her into his arms. If being a grown-up means waking up beside you every morning and building something meaningful together, I'm all for it. Even with all the board meetings and budget discussions, Charlie teased. Even then, Sawyer assured her, though I still prefer the stables to the boardroom. Me too, Charlie admitted, and always have. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as Hope trotted over to the fence, nudging Charlie's hand for attention. As she stroked the young horse's sleek neck, Charlie felt a sense of rightness settle deep in her soul. Ashford Meadows was still her home, still her legacy, but it was a legacy she was reshaping on her own terms, with a man who loved her for herself, not for her name or her position. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Sawyer asked, his arm warm around her waist. Charlie leaned into him, content in a way she'd never thought possible. "I was just thinking that sometimes the heart knows where it belongs, even when the head takes a while to catch up." "And where does your heart belong?" Sawyer asked, his voice tender. Charlie looked up at him, at the man who had changed everything simply by seeing her as she truly was. "Right here," she said simply. "With you, with the horses, with this land, this is where my heart found home." Sawyer's answer was a kiss that tasted of sunshine and promise, of a future built on love and shared purpose. And as Charlie kissed him back, she sent a silent thank you to her mother, whose sacrifice had ultimately led her daughter to make a different choice, a choice to follow her heart, no matter where it led. For Charlie Ashford, it had led right where she belonged, all along the end.